Good evening, Tony. Tony, can you hear us?
Good evening, everyone.
How are you?
I'm great. How are you tonight, Jason?
Good, thank you. All right, I'm seeing a full committee, so I'm going to call the Capital Planning Committee meeting for August 10th, 2022 to order at 7:32 p.m. We have two sets of minutes, one prepared by Tony, one prepared by Joe. Were there any questions or comments on either one? We'll go in chronological order. So the first was the June meeting prepared by Tony.
I have just a couple.
Go ahead, Jeff.
On page 2, section 6. Maybe this is name. What does AI mean in terms of section 6 to take this AI?
Let me go look. So I took the action item.
Oh, action item. Okay, action item. Okay.
Okay.
Worth clarifying or just spelling that out because I wasn't sure what that meant. And then just putting down that you drafted them after the adjournments, meeting minutes drafted by Tony Schoner. And then documents referenced during the meeting, just there was like 5 other things that we went through. I'm happy to distribute those or send the names of those, but they're all in the file.
If you could send me the list, I will add them.
Sure.
Thank you.
I will do that. That's all I had.
I had the AI item. I just want to make sure it wasn't artificial intelligence that we're unleashing on the process. And then I agree with you, Jeff, we should add the documents reference. So are there any other comments on those? What about the July minutes drafted by Joe?
So a couple typos, Joe.
Okay.
Just Par Corporation. There's an E on it. There's a bunch of instances of that. P-A-R-E.
Well, that would be yes.
And then sections 2C, streets. There's a steets versus streets.
Oh, yeah. Got that
That's-
one. Okay.
That's it. That's all I had.
Any other questions or comments?
All right. I'll go through and change all those pars.
All right. Everyone comfortable with one motion to approve both in the same motion? Then I will move that we accept the meeting minutes for June 27th, 2022 and July 18th, 2022 with the edits discussed in this meeting. Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All right, roll call vote. Braccio,
Aye.
Park,
Aye.
Palmer,
Aye.
Schoner,
Aye.
Wheeler,
Aye.
and Malinowski is aye. So that's unanimous. Next update is the Neri Building Committee. The committee met last week. They have the town and committee as a whole have now successfully entered the eligibility period, which started on August 1st of 2022. There was a kickoff meeting today with the MSBA themselves on the action items that they are expecting. As they went through the list, most had already been submitted, and the items that had not been submitted, the superintendent has set a deadline on his end to submit in September. We actually have 270 days to complete a series of steps. There will, Lisa, likely be some action coming for the select board authorizing one signature as well on a document. So we will get that over as well. But overall, we're moving forward. We expect to have a better timeline here in the coming month or so of what the next steps could look like. But again, we're probably gotten this feedback a few too many times at this point. We are ahead of where their process typically would be, but They continue to reiterate they are willing to work with us at our speed based on what the town is willing to do or not do. So, any questions on Neri? All right. Next item is Joe. Any new news on the Shopsy South Union Subcommittee?
Yes, the chair has produced an outline, and we've been charged with helping to fill in different sections, and then the committee will get together and consolidate information that we all feel should be in each section. So it may be a couple more meetings, but it looks like we have a general horizon for getting the report out.
Great. Any questions for Joe? Next is the Pavement Management Program update. So we obviously had extensive conversation on this 2 meetings ago. Select Board took action on it, and as of this morning, the RFP or RFQ mark was out to the market to receive responses. So we do expect to receive responses by the end of August. Depending on what those responses look like, we'll talk about a proper vetting process for the vendor to be selected, and also a funding mechanism depending upon what the cost ends up being.
RFP, Jason.
Thank you. Any questions on that? The next is 2 meetings ago, we kind of set out our timeline for capital submissions. As everyone's aware, we kind of landed on a date of August 15th for to start our work for this fiscal year. Happy to report that some department heads have completed their work. Some are a work in process, and some we've heard nothing from. So I will be reaching out, especially to the ones we've heard nothing from, to just make sure they're on track so that the committee has ample time to start reviewing items. I would like to commend at least the department heads that have reached out for help along the way. They have asked really good questions to hopefully streamline, their time, their process, but also our process. And thanks to Mark and Brian, who have leaned in on some of those conversations to help, bring a holistic approach forward. I'll name one in particular is the ongoing discussions about body cameras now that the collective bargaining agreement has been signed with the police. So that has obviously more aspects beyond capital in terms of finance. It's beyond finance. It's obviously an operational item too. So they've started the collaboration there in terms of timing of when that's appropriate to implement, assuming, the appropriate funding, finds its way to approval at town meeting. So more to come on that in terms of a timeline of how we're going to vet these come the fall. But I would just ask all of you to be thinking about, has the system in the past worked? Do you want to do different tweaks? Do you want to have each department head in? But just give that some thought in advance of our next meeting. Any questions? All right. Final is capital and finance software. So those of you that were, I'll call it our founding members, are aware that we did experiment with a software called ClearGov from a capital perspective 2 fiscal years ago. And that was also used that same year by the advisory committee and the town finance team and the select board for operational. The town basically did not renew that contract after the first year because of perceived, deficiencies in what they thought we were going to get and versus what we were getting. But it has now risen to a select board goal for this year to find a new software package or go back to the old one now that they have made some improvements. And I have participated as chair of this committee, along with the chair of the advisory committee and the town finance team, and just watching the demos so that we could ask some questions to help inform the finance team's ultimate decision. I think the feedback to date is, candidly, I think there are 3 very good providers. And I think, there are some pros and cons for Southborough that one may rise over another, but that process is ongoing. I just want everyone to be aware of it. I do not, though, expect that to be in place for this budget season based on the feedback that the finance team has given. So it would be a future budget cycle, but I was pretty enthusiastic from a capital perspective of what this may be able to do for us, especially as you think through some of the longer term scenarios that we may need to start to work through. Any questions on that? All right. So with that, we're going to go into item 4. I'm going to bring Karen over, and then I probably have what I would perceive to be a longer than normal introduction to the topic to hopefully keep us on track for the evening. And then we can kind of go through in as much or as little detail specific items that the committee would like to do. So Karen, I see you're here. Can you hear us?
Yeah. Okay, can you hear me now?
We now can.
Okay.
All right, welcome and thank you. So I'm going to start by thanking Karen for the time that she spent with myself in particular, getting ready for this meeting to make sure that we would have an effective meeting and have the data available to us that I think is needed to execute on what we've been asked to do. As a brief reminder, and just for especially the members of the public that are listening or will watch the ultimate replay of this, at this year's annual town meeting, as part of the ongoing discussions of how road maintenance money that's appropriated by the town is allocated, there was an inclusion in the warrant that capital planning would vet how the FY23 allocation was being spent. Karen, can I just have you mute for a second?
Yes.
Technically, there was no such item written for prior year spending, but in the interest of transparency, we are going to review kind of a complete listing of streets that have been submitted for consideration for funding. The funding will come from multiple sources, some being road maintenance money that was allocated at various town meetings. Some will be Chapter 90, which comes from the state, which will also require a public discussion by the select board, and ultimately they will make the call on that. And then there was a special program this winter that gave the town of Southborough approximately $200,000 to fix items like potholes and repairs and a lot of the items that we will be discussing here. So that money is available at this point and needs to be spent during this fiscal year. There were some questions that came into me in advance of the meeting as a result of an advertisement that we ran. So 2 weeks ago, we posted a listing of the streets that would be under consideration. We followed that up with a detailed Excel spreadsheet, which is what we'll be discussing tonight, that shows the scope of work and the actual cost by street / project. If you sum all of those up, it sums to a number very close to $3 million. Tonight, based on the latest math of existing contracts, our goal, if we're ready, should be to allocate no more than 1.3 million of that. So there will certainly be projects that are valid, warranted, need to happen, that just can't be part of our recommendation tonight due to sheer funding. And Karen or Mark are welcome to expand on this. The main reason is they always hold back a certain amount for contingencies because of how road contracts are written in the state. For example, fuel escalation and other things that come up during the course of projects that we can't spend and allocate every penny, because otherwise you may get caught in a situation where you can't finish a project that needs to be finished because you've over allocated. So our goal tonight will be to work towards a potential recommendation related to about $1.3 million. All public correspondence that was received through this morning was provided to all committee members in advance of the meeting, and I just want everyone to be aware of that. I also acknowledged receipt of that correspondence to each individual person that sent it to me. I will also note that I received 3 to 4 more emails specifically related to support for the following roads, which was consistent with emails we had already received on the same topic. It related to support related to Carolyn, Ted, and Brookside, which are on our sheet. I also received numerous questions in advance of tonight related to sidewalks in particular. We are not tonight being asked to allocate money related to the placeholder that the ARPA committee recommended, approximately $700,000, specifically related to sidewalks. The select board chair, Kathy Cook, has asked Capital to start looking at that as soon as we complete the process we're doing here tonight. I also would be remiss to not note that the master plan committee did recommend the formation, or maybe reformation, Lisa, of a committee to look at sidewalks, et cetera. So I would ask our select board representative, Lisa, to take that back to the board for concurrence amongst that group of whether Capital should continue down the 700K path, or whether that committee may be formed and would look at that more holistically. With that being said, there are certainly sidewalks on the list that was provided to us in advance of the meeting. It's up to this committee to decide whether we advance any of those or not, given the longer term and broader conversation that may occur. The other thing I also think is worth noting is I specifically asked Karen Galligan to denote roads that may be impacted by the Hopkinton project that we talked about at length with Public Works Planning Board. I believe a few of us asked questions specifically related to which roads would be dug up so that we're not digging up a road, doing a nice repair, and then having this project actually move forward and redigging it up. We all remember the Hopkinton DPW superintendent's response to that question, that the initial intent is not to do a full repave of any roads they disturb. They would just fix the part they disturb. I think a lot of us have driven around town enough to know what happens when you dig up a road for a utility connection, and really think that that will obviously be ultimately up to the select board in terms of what they decide to negotiate with the town of Hopkinton. But I thought it was important for us to know, and Karen can comment on approximate timing of how this would all work, but that we would know that a road that we may think really needs work today may be disturbed a year from now or 2 years from now, depending upon the outcome of that project. The final thing I will say is there is discussion at the bottom related to the golf course parking lot. That is not for discussion tonight, because that is an article that would not be funded with road maintenance money. It would be, as Mr. Purple explained when he submitted that for the capital plan, that would be something that would have to be funded through golf revolving fund and or CPC type funding, or a future article at town meeting. And the reason it is here, though, is if there is funding available for it, it could be bundled into a contract. And as we all know, economies of scale and in making the contract more attractive gets probably us a better bid result depending upon the scope. The final item I will say is I'm aware of one conflict, at least right now, is Jeff is going to recuse himself related to Stockwell in Fitzgerald. Or is there anyone else that has a conflict on any other road that's listed on our spreadsheet? Okay. So I'm seeing none. So what we will do is I'm just going to ask for there to be absolutely no discussion on Stockwell and Fitzgerald until the end. We'll ask Jeff to leave, and then we'll bring him back in. And if we do decide to move forward with that piece, we'll do a separate motion. But I think Jeff should be able to participate on the remainder and just not weigh in on that potential item. Are there any questions on how we're going to do this? Okay. Karen, I don't know if there's anything you want to say to layer on to what I have denoted before I ask you just a few questions for the interest of transparency on this process.
No, I'm good. That was a really good explanation, better than I would have done.
Okay. So this is new. I do not expect it to be perfect, but I think we can hopefully all agree that this is a far more transparent way for the town to see how these decisions are made. I received multiple emails asking why it wasn't prioritized in advance. My simple response, it's my own response, you can all agree or disagree, was I didn't think it was appropriate for myself. I didn't think it was appropriate for Karen. Didn't think it was appropriate for Mark. That's why we're in a public meeting. And I think we'll all be able to hopefully prioritize based on what we hear and also stay within the cost constraints. In an ideal world, we'd pave these all and we'd be done. I think we'd all like that. But obviously there are limitations to what we can do. Karen, I'm going to start with a few just items just that I think would be helpful for everyone to make sure we're on the same page of. So assuming we vote a path to move forward tonight, there would be next a discussion at the select board level. Your plan to go out to RFP on this would be when, in an ideal world?
If normally I would, at this point in the year, I would try to get one out in September, but the way this year has been and the way bidding is with, there's so much money out there with these projects that I wouldn't expect that any work would get done until next spring, which leads to a different kind of question. But I was hoping we'd be able to do something this year, but basically just from talking to contractors and the amount of work that's out there right now, things are bidding high, and obviously asphalt is bidding very high right now. It's hopefully starting to come down because our liquid tons are coming, our liquid cost per liquid ton is coming down. But the problem is that there's so much work, there's not a lot of companies not busy. So we probably could get some stuff done, but not a full contract, not $1.3 million worth, I don't think. So some would be spring, or we could wait to spring and do it all next spring.
Okay. So that's, I think, helpful background in the event that we have differences of opinion along the way here. The next item, Karen, is I think I received a call actually related to Newton Street. I just wanted to raise it because it wasn't in a correspondence. Is we obviously approved a water main on that road last town meeting in the annual. It looks like they're starting to mobilize and get going. We obviously know that that road is going to be disturbed. Is a full repave of that road included as part of what we authorized at town meeting?
No. So what's included in that contract is just the trench. We do have an option. There is an add alt, which we didn't actually, which just did like a full lane worth of paving over that at the end, which is actually what the contractor wants to do. But we do want it to sit at least the winter. Every trench, we want it to sit for the winter, because no matter how well they compact, and this contractor is actually very good. The one doing the Newton Street water main, I'm sure that trench is going to come out great and it shouldn't be a problem, but we want to sit the winter. mill it down, pave at least the width. But if it seems like it's a problem or the rest of the road is not holding up well based on having a trench in it, so I know everyone's thinking Parkerville Road, right? Because the road was not in good shape to begin with. So just to be clear, Parkerville Road has a really bad base, right? It's kind of running through a wetlands. And the old gas trenches showing through that has been since almost the year after we reclaimed that road when we put the sidewalk in. That shouldn't be the case with Newton Street. The material is good underneath. So we are planning at this point that we'll let the trench sit for the winter, come back, and then mill it over. And now, of course, there's going to be more cross trenches because because it was watered. So they're replacing the services up to the curb. So that might make us say, you know what, no, let's take the money in there and add to it. And we'll have to do that out of water funds because it's a water project, right? And mill and pave the full width. But it's better to see whether or not we need to, and see how it hangs out, like how it fleshes itself out over the winter.
So depending upon the condition, regardless of whether you need to full width, half a width, that's a future discussion, but it would be part of that article, not something that you would be bringing back to us from a road maintenance perspective.
Correct. We would keep it. It would be a repair because of the water, a maintenance because of water.
Okay. Okay. So last question before I see how the committee wants to go down the list, or if they just want to ask questions on specific items, given the correspondence that we have received, is related to the Hopkinton connection. So when we say it would be affected if the interconnection happens, what is the earliest possible date that interconnection could happen?
So their town meeting voted design work already. They haven't pulled the trigger on the design work because Southborough hasn't agreed that they can do this process. So when Southborough gives them the go ahead, our engineering company, who is, we asked them to use PAR, which is our engineering company for water, so that we're sure our interests are, not that they wouldn't be professional engineers or professional engineers, and they have to care about all of it, but they know our system well. So we have Hopkinton is using them to do the design. When they do that, they're anticipating at least 9 months of design. So they would probably be going next fall. The earlier we pull the trigger, the earlier they can go to town meeting to get the funding. So they would be looking at funding it next fall town meeting for them. And then at that point, or they might even try to fund on a preliminary idea, right? If they can get something, they might try to fund off of just that preliminary estimate we saw, and then do something for if it goes over that in the fall. But with that being said, I don't think the design would be done until next, the end of summer next year. And then at that point, with bidding and everything, I think we wouldn't see a lot of work happening. And the way it would have to start, where it would start and end like that, that's part of what they have to design is what comes first, right? Do they do the piping? Do they upgrade the station, upgrade the tank, right? So what the sequencing would be, a couple things could happen at once. We can't shut down a pumping station except over the winter because our usage is so high in the summer. So there's some things that would end up waiting. So I don't think, as far as roads being torn up, I don't think we'd be looking at that happening until at the earliest 2024.
Okay,
But
thank you.
other work might start happening before that.
Understood. That's helpful. And I do see members of the public are raising their hand. We are a ways away from being able to entertain questions. I need to go around the committee first, so I will come to you. Just wanted to acknowledge that. So with that, do you all want me to go around individually for your questions, or do you want to go down the buckets of list and ask questions by grouping? Is there a preference on how we do this?
No, don't think there's an easy way.
Okay, so Lisa, why don't you just go with any questions that you had specific to any of the items that were presented on the list?
Okay, so I had a question. I saw there were 2 letters from Davis Road. And Karen, I had a question on that regarding removing the island, because that was part of the subdivision approval. Does planning board gonna have to modify that?
That was something that, when we had talked about Deerfoot, the intersection change at Deerfoot, town council had opined that if we're not changing the right of way, we're just changing it, and we've done this before, like if we add a sidewalk, but there was no sidewalk in the subdivision approval, we don't have to go back to planning for that. But then with this, the right of way isn't changing because we're not changing the property lines. We're just taking that out. So my understanding is it doesn't have to, whether the town decides that they want to go there anyway is part, since this whole process is new, I don't know who makes that decision, but based on what town council had said, it shouldn't need to.
I would just follow up on that again, Karen, just to be sure. I would hate for us to put that on the list for an RFP and planning board potentially have an issue with that. So that would just be a suggestion. I would just follow up with either town council again or planning board. Because I think there's going to be a question on that.
And Lisa, even if it's not required, it certainly can't hurt to have them discuss it.
Yeah. No, I just want to make sure that there's not a problem there.
Okay.
I mean, specifics on a lot of these, Jason, I was more concerned about, I mean, obviously I'm not an asphalt person or a road person. So for me, it's hard for us to prioritize the list. I don't know if one road is worse than the other. I mean, I look at, like, for instance, Lover's Lane, and that's really bad. Anybody that's gone down that road, it's narrow, it's got a ton of potholes. So I guess I'm interested to hear what everybody else on the committee is thinking and how they would think to prioritize when certainly we're not road people.
Go ahead, Tony.
Yes, I share that sentiment. Is there a quality factor that's been assigned to each of these roads that would give us a way of saying, these are the 10 categories and we're going to try to cover all of category 1 or something? Is there some, sort of objective?
So want me to answer that, Jason?
Yes.
Categorization of the roads that exists that might help guide?
Go ahead, Karen.
Okay, I'm sorry. I didn't know if it was because I can't see everyone, and I apologize. I'm on my phone because I was thinking the meeting was tomorrow night. I think I told people it was tomorrow night, so hopefully they found out the right answer. So one thing that the town is looking into is pavement management, which I think you guys are actually going to be taking on. And that will give an actual number, and it'll make things especially because we're going through a public process now. So that's very helpful. It'll be helpful for people, who are looking at this, and it'll give a number and say, well, if you do these streets, these are your worst streets. It's going to cost you this, but for that much money, you can do this secondary set. So when we look at the roads, we usually look after frost heaves, right? So everything looks a little bit worse during the frost heaves. So you want to see what's happening. One of the things is that, so Lover's Lane is a perfect example of a road that has a lot of problems. And we have done chip seal on that before. The problem with that road, there's no drainage or very little. The hill that like Jacob's Lane is on bleeds down with quite a bit of water. We do have like, you know, some swales in there, but there's trees in the swales, or the swale goes under a driveway or gets clogged. It runs over the road. The road doesn't have a sidewalk. The trees are right on the road. There's not a lot of right of way width, and the base is not good, right? So it's so wet. We also know we want that a main project for the water master plan is to replace the main in there at some point. So that's why, like, if you look at the plan, I kind of said it's really a Band-Aid, because that road should become a project, right? So we're talking about road maintenance, and they're very different things. Road maintenance, we're maybe reshaping a road with milling and paving. Maybe we're doing a reclaim, right, where we grind the asphalt into the ground in order to make the base a little better, but it only really makes the base better the top 6 inches, say. But then to grade it and make sure you're not messing up everyone's driveway, you do end up pulling some of the good material away, right? But then you pave it, and now you're 4 inches of asphalt, and that's a lot of the paving we've done in town. If you look at the list of previously done roads, right? So you look, and we did that on Flag, and we did that on Pine Hill. Both those roads don't have good drainage, have poor base. They don't look very good, but Newton Street, we did that on. Newton Street looks good, right? So that's why when we look at things, I know what we've done. I know what the base is like, or what's going on with it, and how long it'll last. So one of the things, we're at the point that we're looking at subdivisions now, right? So, you know, you want to keep something like Pine Hill, you want to keep something like Flag Road, Sears Road, right? Like these there are main roads, right? They go through, they connect two things, they connect 30 and 85, they are, you know, or Marlboro Road technically, right? And 85, or 9 and 30, whatever they're connecting, those roads we try to keep good. They don't have a good base, you're kind of stuck, right? So, but you can mill and pave that, and the strength comes obviously in the asphalt, right? Thickness of the asphalt. These subdivision roads, the planning board, subdivision rules don't call for 4 inches of pavement. So what happens is there's a little bit less pavement. It doesn't last as long. But there's not a lot of traffic on it, right? Because it's just the people in the neighborhood. So you let that go for a little bit, keep the mains going. But now we are at the point that, like with Carolyn, Ted, Brookside really just has no good base at all. That's why that's asked to be a reclaim, or was a recommendation was a reclaim for that. So it's there, that list is based on either the population using the area, the like how much how much more we see problems with it that might be coming down the road. So like Maple Crest, there's a constant problem down there with the gas services and water services. So whenever I think about doing it, I'm like, well, we're going to end up digging that up again. And we've been kind of waiting to see if the gas company might redo all the services, right, at some point, because it needs to be done. I'm sorry, I'm totally over talking, but that's sort of how the list gets made. Is you look at the road, you're like, all right, all these roads have about the same usage, are about the same age, or, you know, and all are cracked, heave a lot in the winter, or, you know, have a lot of trenches in them. So we're putting those on the list because it's a smaller contract this year, and the mains need to become larger projects. Like Corderville is, like the mains that are in bad shape. Like Sears Road's not in very bad shape, and we'll be able to mill and pave that in a few years and it'll be great, right? But Pine Hill needs more than that. So if that makes any sense to anybody, that would be good.
So Karen, is it fair to say in synopsis of what you just said, is each of these roads are in roughly the same condition, but the level and scope of work to bring them to form may be very different because of the conditions you just mentioned in terms of how they were originally installed, subdivision versus main road, and then obviously some of the underlying items like Lovers has this water main underneath it, etc.
Yeah, yes. You know, we definitely, I would say probably right now, Lover's Lane is probably the worst road in town as far, and which is why it's like, maybe we put a Band-Aid on it, spend the money and just, and until we can make it a project, which is sort of, if you look at what Corderville, when we've done infrared and patched up the really bad spots, knowing that there's a project. We did that with Main Street, knowing we were going to have a project. So, but we have to have the discussion of Lovers and Pine Hill. You know, are we going to make those projects at some point?
Okay. Joe?
What during to do the water main project, how far out are we looking at Lover's Lane?
Oh, that the water main project for Lovers is that would be out far enough that, you know, if we were to pave and put pavement on there, we've got to be 7 to 10 years out at least on water. So it would be fine, because you do want to try to touch the pavement every 7 to 10 years, whether it's crack sealing or a chip seal. We don't tend to do it as much as we should because the money's always pretty tight.
Yeah, no, I understand that. I'm just, I equate this to, you know, doing anything on your house where if you have solar panels, you don't want to redo a roof prematurely because you have to take the panels off. But if we're not doing if the water project isn't due for another 7 to 10 years, then I don't think waiting very long on one of the worst roads in town makes much sense. I also had a second question on North Parkerville. The section between Route 9 and the school entrance is pretty broken up as well. And I noticed that's down the list a ways. And I'm wondering if the estimate on this list is for the whole of North Parkerville or just for that section between the Route 9 and the school?
It's for the entire length, but it's just a mill and pave, so it's milling off the surface, and you know, there'd probably be some leveling involved to just get a good shape to the road, and then a wearing course on top.
And what would be the course of action between now and the time this project would come up, given it's at what, number 36? We would be filling them
It's at number 36 where?
On this list that we were given.
Okay, the list isn't in any kind of order.
Okay.
So that's not a prioritized order. I kind of was just grouping based on, you know, neighborhood or kind of what was, I don't know, if you kind of look at it, it's sort of just grouped, and I think Parkville sort of fits.
That's okay, Karen. I understand what you said. But if for instance, we could do that part between 9 and the school and maybe put off what may not necessarily need to be done, is that any way to conduct our road policy, or is that just making it more difficult for you?
We have done that. So when we did Flag and Pine Hill, we broke it into 2 pieces because they were long, but I don't know that it's worth it on Parkerville because the rest of the road is really just as bad. The trench keeps going. You still have the old trench showing through, and you know, the base there is just so bad that even trying to meet up an old, you know, a year-old or 2-year-old layer could be difficult. I think it's better to kind of give it one, you know, one monolithic piece. I mean, it'll have a seam in it, unfortunately, down the center, but try to keep it all going one way versus breaking it up into 2. On that road right now, I don't know that that's a good idea.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Okay. Couple questions. So when I see these potential Band-Aids on here, like i.e. Pine Hill Road, it would be good to get some context in terms of what would a full rehab cost? So you can get a better idea of, like, how much money we're throwing at a project that we're gonna have to fix eventually. And that's a big ticket. That's $254,000. I'm not sure, what is it, $500,000 to redo the road completely? Is it something different? Because to have that context would be helpful to make a decision on that one.
Okay, so I don't have an exact, but I can say is that, so Pine Hill, obviously a very long road. One of the things it would need would be drainage. And if you think about Corderville Road, which is running in at 2.9, has some drainage improvements, isn't taking up all the base or anything, right? It's just, it's a mill and pave on a lot of that, but it's adding and fixing the sidewalk. You're probably talking in that same range of money. We're talking, it's going to be over $2 million, I would think, to get Pine Hill. And I have had a lot of people on Pine Hill have interest in sidewalk getting a sidewalk in there. So, that out of the complete streets, you can get a little bit of money for, but I do think we're talking a $2 to $3 million project.
Okay. And is it possible to work with Framingham on the entire road and bring the cost down?
So Framingham's piece of Pine Hill is really very short.
Okay.
So, so unfortunately that we don't have a lot of leeway with that.
Okay. My other question, if you look at the top, the Constitution neighborhood as an example, it's almost $500,000 in total. I don't really have an idea of when that was originally done. There's no corresponding information in the next tab. I'm assuming it's probably original. I just don't know how old the neighborhood is. So some of these here I was trying to cross-reference against when they were last done to assess the age. And I was taking that in consideration, as well as just safety concerns. I think that should be kind of paramount to the points that I think Lisa brought up and Tony, I believe. So those two things would be really helpful to get that information in terms of conditioning of the roads and when they were built, whether they're original, having that data added in, or just cross-referencing what is in the previous tab, which is not all of them, to be honest. I just felt like having that context would also be really helpful.
Okay. Yep. That neighborhood is original, except for one area where we had a water main break and we did reclaim the road. So I'm not sure. So I know it's never been touched for other pavement. But I'm not sure when that was built, because I believe that was one of the ones where they built part and then they went bankrupt and then they built the houses and then it became adopted by the town. So I don't even know the adoption date or, the date it became a street, if would give us any good information. So I can see what I can find on old plans for that.
And are any of these roads, I guess my last question, are these roads scenic? Is there any type of overlap with CPC on those to get funds for roads? I don't know if that's a possibility, just trying to think of funding sources.
CPC I don't think has the ability to do that. A lot of them are scenic, but it's road maintenance isn't really something that CPC can be used for.
Fair enough. Thank you, Karen.
Welcome.
Karen W.
Yeah, hi, Karen. Just a couple of questions. You mentioned some of these pavings would be considered projects. And so the projects, are they all 7 to 10 years out, or some of them shorter than that?
So something like the Corderville Road project hopefully gets gets funded at town meeting in the spring, right? At that, we are looking at the Marlborough Road. So basically Marlborough Road, then it turns into technically a little piece of Newton Street, but everyone calls it Framingham Road. So then Framingham Road to Boston Road, where it becomes State Road. We're looking at that corridor for to be on a tip, right? So kind of the same idea we had with Main Street, where we can add sidewalks, we can do a lot of work on that. So that is a project sort of in the works too, but otherwise there's nothing else that's, we were told to kind of get projects ready. So we have survey, and that's where that corridor came up as a potential project for a tip, because we do have a lot of right of way there, but we don't have any other actual projects planned, or in the works.
Okay, so all the streets listed here are not in consideration for projects.
Correct. Or right, not in consideration currently for a project.
Okay. And the other question, you've grouped them in, kind of neighborhoods in some cases. And so is there any benefit in terms of, I guess, cost of doing all the streets in a particular neighborhood versus just doing a couple of streets within a neighborhood?
Generally there isn't, because when you're there and they're paving this, and it really comes down to the quality of the way they can do the quality of the work, right? So the quality comes out better if, you're at an intersection and they're paving the whole intersection, right? And so if you're thinking of like Cottage Street and Hammond and that old Corderville piece, right? That's actually would be a much better product when they can do it all together, because you're also trying to make the water move the way you want it to move. And when a neighborhood's kind of connected to itself that way, that it's a better project, or a better product comes out of the paving. When they added like William Cleary Lane, and we had just paved White Bagley, there was a little puddle, and there was just no way to get rid of it. But had we paved White Bagley after William Cleary was built, we would have been able to deal with that.
Yeah, so Karen, does that mean that you are ideally recommending that all of the streets within a neighborhood on this list either are done or not done?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Tony?
So I have a couple of comments and then questions here, so bear with me. So I happen to live on Constitution, so I'll have to recuse myself if we get to a vote. I think it was paved in 1995, so I lived here at the time when it was paved. I have to say though, so Jason, are we trying to get to a recommendation from this group of what roads should be paved? Is that what we're trying to get to?
Yeah, it is.
That seems like a really challenging task for this group of people. Now, I could see if someone had, in my opinion, right, just my opinion, if someone could provide a recommendation, maybe Karen Galligan could provide a recommendation. If we want to spend, what's the number, $1.3 million right now? There was some number you wanted to allocate right now? Was that the number?
And I don't want to put words in Karen's mouth. I think she's willing to make a recommendation, but we hadn't discussed as a committee.
Okay.
So if that's the direction we want to go, we need to say that, and Karen can tell us whether she's ready to do that tonight or not. And obviously we can take public input as well in that process. But before this, all that used to happen was a list would go to the select board. They would do what they had to do with Chapter 90, and everything else was kind of done with just which resident was reaching out, what Karen noticed, what her crews noticed. in town. So we're just trying to create visibility to the process, and a recommendation and assurance is that first and foremost, it's been a transparent process where people have at least been able to have a voice. Not everyone's going to like every decision. I think we have to agree with that. So if that's the direction you want to go when you're done with your other questions and comments, we should debate that as a group.
Okay, so thank you for that background, Jason. So this is my opinion, and so then I'm obviously open to discussing it. But my opinion is that Karen should give us a recommendation. She should give us a recommendation for a specific budget, what she recommends we pave. She should tell us why those streets are on her list of $1.3 million or whatever the number is. She should tell us what the next 5 or 10 streets that could be considered instead of the 10 or 20 streets that are on the list, so that some trade-offs could be considered. But us just asking random questions for an hour or two, I don't know that that's going to get us to an answer. My opinion. So I think it would be more productive if someone could give us a strong starting point that we could then have. And of course, I'm all for open meetings, and I've read all the correspondence, and lots of people have opinions, and I think that's all very good. But we ought to have a starting point, which is a thoughtful, reasoned proposal. Thank you.
So Karen, are you ready to do that tonight, or would you need another meeting for that?
Sorry, I'm having trouble with my mute button. I could put together a memo because because it's the why will be it gets confusing on what it would be, what ultimately. But basically, yes, if normally if I would have gone out to, if this was the way we would do it before, I would go out to bid. There really isn't a public process, and we pave the streets we pave, and then people call and say, well, oh, I wanted my street paved, and we say, yep, we know you need it paved too. This is what we had the money for this year. But I can definitely do that if I don't have the thing in front of me right now, so I can look at the costs. And I mean, I basically can, I know 3 areas that would probably be the max of what I would do right now. And then I think I'd sit on either if it didn't add up enough, or I'd sit on the rest and I wouldn't do anything else.
And if you were willing to do that, Karen, maybe someone from our committee could sit with you and review it a little bit, to try to, help vet some of the questions that we might expect that the general public or this committee would ask, just to try to accelerate the process, if we're allowed to do that. Jason, I don't know if we're allowed to do that, but just to help.
And one member is absolutely allowed to do that and bring it back.
Okay, I think that would be a very good idea.
Okay. Is anyone opposed to that process? Okay, I figured that's where we're going to land. So a few things before we take public comment on this. I think in the interest of moving this along, if we're going to do that, I think it seems like it's not going to take Karen very long to do that. She obviously knows which roads are in what condition, has been answering our questions kind of on the fly here. We would need to agree to a quick turnaround meeting, obviously within open meeting law, parameters, just on that topic. So can everyone kind of agree to that pending? I know Joe is traveling, so he may be out, but that sound relatively okay with you via Zoom, sort of thing.
Jason, are you looking at like potentially Monday? Are you thinking?
Yeah, I guess we could do Monday. I would have enough time to post for that if I do it in the morning. If people were okay with that. Karen, does that give you enough time?
Yes, I can put something together, definitely.
Okay.
So that maybe you would not have it at the posting tomorrow morning, but I could get it to you either by end of day Thursday or early Friday.
I don't need it at the posting. I just need to get the
Okay.
agenda for 48 hours, and then I think obviously the public are going to have some comments here, I imagine, but we will post that memo to the town website. And I'll actually just send it to the clerk too, to post with like the select board does with the packets as well, just to make sure it's in as many spots as possible, just in case people have things they want us to consider that, are off the mark. I do have one question / request that I think crossed most of the feedback that I've heard verbally or in writing, Karen, is I always hear the term, we as taxpayers should get the biggest bang for our buck, right? So obviously a little subdivision that has 5 houses, those 5 people really want that road paved, right? And I honestly don't know how many, without going down each individual one, how many are on each of this list. But obviously a main road, I'm going to use Parkerville North as my example here, is clearly used by probably almost every resident in town for some way, shape, or form. So are there any main roads on this list that you could see not coming forward? And are we really looking at a question of, Pine Hill, do we do this mill and pave now, knowing that 10 years down the road, we may have this Porterville Road type project on Pine Hill? Is that like the sort of things you're going to be looking at, just so we can understand what's going to kind of be coming back to us?
So yeah, I would. So knowing that people want a project on that road, I would tend to lower the priority of it. Actually, because even though, yes, we want more bang for our buck, we tend to, and I mean, everyone who lives on a subdivision road knows it, we tend to ignore the subdivisions and let them get a little bit worse before we, because less people are using the road, but they are still paying taxes and they still need a good, safe road. So that is where a lot of times subdivisions, and thankfully, because the planning board, even though we don't get a lot of thickness in asphalt, they make sure we get good gravel. So the material is usually better in the subdivisions. So when we pave it, it lasts much longer also. So that's why Flag Road, Pine Hill Road, when we do those roads, we're back more often than we would be if we were to pave, if we pave Carolyn, we might not have to touch that in reality, like do anything that's going to cost, more than $15,000 of just like some sort of small maintenance for 20 years. But Pine Hill in 10 to 15 years, it's going to need work already, a lot of work, unless we put drainage in and actually fix that road and do a project. Did that help?
Okay. Does any committee member have anything else they want to raise before I go to public comment on this and our next steps? Okay. So Ms. Burns-Fury, I know you've been very patient, so I'm going to allow you to speak.
Hi, are we on?
You are on.
I have a lot of questions. I'm sorry. I do appreciate the questions that I've heard from the capital planning tonight. And I think they're very valid questions. I think I want to just go a little bit further. I'm going to take a page from Grant Farrington's playbook. And I pulled together a friend today and I drove every single one of these roads that are on this list. And my friend and I rated them based on the condition that we saw and also what we thought was the usage / need for that road. And I have some really significant concerns about some of the streets that are on this list. So I guess my first question is, how did the streets get on this list? Is it just because someone called and said, you know, there's a boo-boo out on my road and I want it repaved? Or is it something else? I saw a real disconnect in the streets that were prioritized versus some of the other streets in this town.
So I'll let Karen speak to how she pulled together the streets, and then I would like to come back to you for you to at least express your opinion based on your observations with your friend of which roads you thought did not belong on the list. And I also surmised through that comment that you have roads that are not on this list that you think should be on it, but you can tell me if I'm misinterpreting the comment. So Karen, I'm going to go to you first of how this list comes together in the first place.
Okay, so it's kind of like I explained earlier that we look at the roads, we look at what we have for money, or we think we're going to have. As I said, a lot of the main roads are rough roads to deal with. They're expensive and they need a larger work than road maintenance, right? They don't need road maintenance. They need a project. They need a rebuild. They need drainage. They need work, right? An actual project. So at the same time, again, we look at, all right, when we have a lot of trenches where the water's getting in, it's creating problems where when the water gets into the road, now you're going to get your frost heaves. That breaks up the material in the asphalt more. If the material underneath the road is not good, and we need the drainage, and it becomes a bigger project, it pushes it really out of being a road maintenance project. So, you know, it's and at the same time, subdivision roads do need to be dealt with. If something like William Onthank, which does have drainage, but the road gets out of shape because the person went bankrupt when they were building it, so they didn't complete it, and some of it had to be completed by the town. That to make that road and fix it once, fix the drainage, get the pavement right, that you're going to get more for your buck, right? Because you're going to not have to go back to that road and deal with it. So all that comes into view. If people want to just, and that's what the pavement management, that's what the town wants to go towards, is just to have a number and it spits out the list, and exactly what Ms. Fiore was just talking about, that, well, I think this road's more important and it should get paved. Well, that's what that piece of that thing is going to tell you, and you know, or it's going to say no, that shouldn't get paved because, and it gives you your reasons. But right now we're doing that within our knowledge versus doing it through a computer. But but that's where the town's going, so you will have actual numerical values on everything soon.
Okay. So that actually didn't answer my question, which was, how did these streets get on a list? Okay.
Like I said,
wait a minute. I'm sorry. Can I just speak for a second?
Okay, sorry.
And then Ms. Galligan said, you know, it's better to fix it once, but that doesn't explain why she wants to spend a number of hundreds of thousands of dollars to do what is on this list called Band-Aids. Wouldn't it be better to take a number of these streets off that really don't need it? And I'm sorry, I drove these streets, as I said today, take a number of these streets off that don't need it and concentrate on the big projects and not do a Band-Aid, do the freaking project so that you're not having to do it in 5 years or 3 years or something to create that fix. I mean, why are we just going over and over and over these roads? This is crazy. There should be a whole fiscal plan. How long do these roads last based on usage and age and plan it out for a number of years of what needs to be fixed. Why are we looking at these things? How did they get on this list? Did somebody on Constitution Drive call me and say, I need this road fixed? I drove, can I ask you, each one of you people on capital planning, and I appreciate all the work that you've gone through, but you're the ones that are going to make this decision and make a prioritization of these streets. Has any of you gone out and driven each one of these roads and looked at them, looked at the condition of these streets to confirm what we are hearing from Ms. Galligan and this list? Has anybody done that?
Yes,
I'm sorry, did you?
I did.
Who?
Jason, and I see Lisa shaking her head.
Yep, I did as well.
And what were your opinions on some of these streets that, like, I just heard her say William Cleary Lane, was the issue, was an issue versus White Bagley. William Cleary Lane isn't even on the list. I mean, you're talking about putting
Patty, she used that as an example of timing. So Karen Wheeler, a committee member, had asked, when we think about groups in the bucket here for different neighborhoods, is it kind of all or nothing for those groupings? And the general answer was yes, otherwise you get an improper intersection. And as a former owner of a property on William Cleary, I can attest to how awful it was at that corner when they regraded it improperly because of, not that the town did anything wrong when they paved White Bagley, but the timing of when White Bagley was paved compared to when the developer finished that subdevelopment, it just was an issue. So that was what she was responding to with that particular item. So I think my personal view and your comments are, I would ask you if there are certain items that you want this committee to focus on that you think should absolutely not even be under consideration based on your personal opinion. I'd ask that you raise those now so that the committee members can do whatever diligence they want, not knowing exactly what Karen's going to come back with. I do agree, before you give that list, that some of these are in different levels of need and should have different levels of prioritization. I very quickly got to the 1.3 using my eyes and knowledge of the cost estimates here to make an impact in the community and start getting some of these in a good spot. There's also, we could pull the plug completely and just let these roads continue to sit another winter and do nothing and wait for the pavement management system, which will certainly dictate future decisions moving forward. But we, as a committee, at least felt it was responsible to have this discussion because there probably is a very impactful number of projects that you can do here to fix, some of these items very, responsibly. So can you just give us the list so that these members can focus on that?
I understand what you're saying. And as I said, when we were driving around, we prioritized these based on the condition of the road as well as the usage of the road. So if something was a small development that doesn't get a lot of usage, it got bumped down a little bit because, there's other roads that need to prioritize. And I agree with you in saying there's a certain amount of budget available, which should be spent, but that should be spent in a priority basis.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, number one on that priority basis should be Parkerville North. I mean,
I don't think you're gonna
heard-
find much objection to that, Patty.
you know,
Keep going.
and
Keep going.
okay, but I have also heard for a number of years that it was an issue with the gas company and the contract with the gas company, whether that road was repaved or just repaired. I've never heard a final decision on that of why we aren't pursuing the gas company for that. That goes into Newton Street, where the water mains are now being replaced. And I think what I just heard was that there's nothing in the contract for that that means those streets will be repaved, that they will only be, that street will only be, will not be repaved. It will only be repaired, which will leave Newton Street in the same condition as we have now had Parkerville Road for X number of years. This is more than just an issue of prioritizing the streets that we need to spend the money on. It's also, how do we spend this money moving forward on the contracts? How do we negotiate those contracts so that it is the best for the taxpayers of Southborough? Anyway, in regard to the streets that we went through, let's see. Ward Road and Bigelow Road. I see no reason to spend money on that. There was some tar patching, there was no divots. Bigelow Road, there was a couple of divots, but this is, really minor usage, I would assume, on these streets because, basically you're only going to travel in those streets if you live there. Lover's Lane calls for sidewalks. The money to do sidewalks, I can't see how that could be reasonably spent because that's a very narrow lane and there's too many trees that would be in the way. And I don't know what would happen. I mean, this would be a whole tree issues, cutting down the trees in order to add sidewalks. Blackthorn.
So let me just clarify on that one.
Yeah, sure.
Karen is proposing a Band-Aid there, which I don't think any of us like Band-Aids. But because she's not proposing a sidewalk today, what she mentioned earlier is that Lovers has a water main under it. That water main is going to need some attention within the next 10 years. So what this would allow us to do, given that her assessment, I think Karen used one of the worst roads in town was the quote she said, would allow us to get that road into better condition until the water main project is up. And at the time of the water main, we'd actually do a real project, which could potentially involve sidewalks.
But does that make real sense? If
That's, I think, the question on the table.
If that street is not in the worst condition, if you're prioritizing the streets, and that street is only going to get a Band-Aid of however many thousands of dollars that we will have to spend, and then in another few years, the entire thing will have to be spent. Is that a good use of taxpayer money? My question. Anyway, let's continue. Blackthorn. I did not see any issues at all with Blackthorn. I understand there might be some considerations based on Park Central or, traffic issues going up there, but the current issue on Blackthorn, I didn't see any problems with that street. Chestnut Hill, there's two things on her list. One is the one-way part, one is the two-way part. On the one-way part of Chestnut Hill, there's some issues with the pavement. I can understand that. On the two-way part of Chestnut Hill, there's absolutely no problems that I saw. I mean, there was no divots, there was no tar patching, there was nothing. Tara, which I guess I should have gone through on the Blackthorn. No, there's nothing. Why? I don't even understand why that's on the list. Let's see. Then we looked at streets that weren't on the list, like Flag, like East Main Street, or that portion of Main Street connecting to East Main Street. East Main Street, yes, I agree. That's a problem. It's a major thoroughfare through and needs work. Winchester and Walker also, I think those were in worse shape than some of the other streets that we saw. Upland, no, we rated that down, that it was not really, shouldn't be a priority. White Bagley, I was a little bit confused. It was talking about the specific on the causeway of, as trying to rationalize this based on the lineage and the square footage that was on this list.
Karen, can you confirm?
It seems as though we're talking about
Patty.
the causeway close to Route 9.
Patty, let me just have Karen confirm what she means by the causeway, and then I'm gonna have to limit you to 1 more minute because we have others waiting and we have other items to get to.
Yes, just the causeway from Route 9 to basically Partridge Hill. And the two-way piece, just to clarify, of Chestnut Hill Road is not the new piece, the new two-way piece. It's the piece it's from Main Street to basically where it becomes one way at the parking lot to the farm. That is two-way, then it goes to one way, then you hit Dairy Farm Lane, and that the rest of that's not under consideration.
Okay, I guess when we were driving that, we didn't really think of that as the two-way, so I'm not sure about that one. William Onthank, I guess I don't understand the whole thing about the replacing of the berms. There's granite curb stops. I got a question about that, and for the total cost of $350,000. Pine Hill definitely has some problems. I could see that. I question whether it needs sidewalks. There are already sidewalks on part of Pine Hill Road. And I'm sorry, that whole Patriot development stuff that, I questioned Jason in that email that I sent to you, Independence, Liberty. You know what? They already have sidewalks. This is a small development where you don't have a lot of through traffic. I don't understand why that would be on a priority list to repave it. Ted Lane and Carolyn Terrace, the same thing. There was some minor patching in the roads, but they were certainly not the worst things that I had seen in the town of Southborough. Davis and Ashley, it's a lovely subdivision, and I'm not sure why you would need to rip out that berm in the middle of it. That was part of the design from the original thing. And I guess my last issue, which I had brought up to Jason in the email, was why we are not insisting that developers, when creating these subdivisions, are building these sidewalks. I went over, I forget what the name of that, the one over off of Chestnut Hill Road is. I'm sorry. The development there. Yes, thank you. There's no sidewalks there. There's a number of the newer developments in town. There's no sidewalks. Why are we not requiring that to be part of the development process, part of the planning process? Because 5 years down the lane, these people are going to come to the town of Southborough and ask for the taxpayers to put sidewalks into their development. The developer should do that. I'm sorry. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your consideration. I just really think these streets need to be prioritized in consideration of taxpayer dollars and how this should be done.
Thanks for your comments. On the last piece, I would suggest you speak to the planning board. That's, I think, a little outside of our purview. I do know a lot of the recent developments do have them. I can't speak to the one you said didn't have it, but I'm sure they could talk through the process. So maybe the town planner would be a good place to start. On the last piece, well, I greatly appreciate your comments and feedback. I would just ask that when you see Ms. Galligan's memo get posted with our packet, if you do have comments, come to our next meeting or submit an email to the capital planning group, and we will certainly take your comments and considerations under consideration.
Could I just comment real quickly, just on just a little bit to defend the planning board? They do require, the subdivision approvals do have sidewalks in them. Sometimes they will waive them if the main road it's off of has no sidewalk, with the intent that the sidewalk gets installed somewhere else. And there's money that's put aside, and that has been used in other locations for sidewalks on mains. So just to be clear, in defense of the planning board, that's not a novel idea. They already have done that.
Can I add one thing to that too, Jason?
Go ahead, Lisa.
So Karen is correct. It's part of the process. Sometimes with subdivisions as well, the sidewalks will be replicated somewhere else in town. I know in a subdivision next to me, that's what happened. Sidewalks weren't put in because we tried to keep a buffer, a little bit of a buffer between the neighbors, and part of the subdivision conditions was that the sidewalks would be replicated elsewhere in town. So again, I think there's a lot of moving pieces with that, but certainly planning board would be the place to start. And as Karen said, it's part of the process. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Tobin.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Jason, could I just jump in before him? Does Jeff need to leave if this is going to be a comment regarding Stockwell?
Mr. Tobin, I assume this is about Stockwell?
It is.
All right, Jeff, I'm just going to put you in the audience for now, and I'll bring you back in.
You ready for me?
I'm ready. Go ahead.
So John Tobin, 6 Stockwell Lane, brought this problem to the town. It'll be 2 years in September, next month. In front of my house, the sidewalk is an absolute disaster. I've been listening for, well, I guess, an hour and a half, and it's interesting. Don't really know much about town politics, but presented at a meeting, gave pictures to Mark Purple. Lisa actually and I spoke last summer. Many emails back and forth with Aaron Galligan. It's not okay the way it is. If there's any priority list, I can't imagine anything being more of a disaster that's in front of my house. I presented pictures of people tripping with crutches. They're real pictures. You can't walk a baby carriage. It's just not okay. And now, to be safe, because we're liable as a town, I pay taxes and like the rest of you, everything's painted orange. So it's a disaster. But things get broken and they need to get fixed. It's just unsightly. So I provided pictures. I can't imagine anybody driving by and not saying, "Oh my God, how did we let it get this bad?" The trees are 25 years old. They were planted on both sides of the street. It is very pretty. There was somebody who brought up the comment, maybe we'll cut down the one side of the trees. Absolutely not. I had Bartlett come out here. I provided that bid to Mark Purple, where they said, I'm not a tree person, but if we did remove the sidewalk and the offending roots were removed, the sidewalk could be put back down and the trees would be absolutely fine. Absolutely not okay to think to remove the trees on one side of the street. Those trees were mandated to be built here, and they're beautiful. They're 25 years old. They need to be here. So I don't know how the priorities work. I'm not driving the rest of the town to look at the other streets, but I can't imagine. So it's been 2 years. I just need to kind of know when this is going to get done. Since I brought this to the town, they have since, like I said, come out and painted the sidewalk and all these upheavals orange. I can provide a picture today if somebody wants to see it, or just drive by my house, 6 Stockwell. And there's lots of planning committees in town, things. This isn't what I do for a living. So but it's been 2 years. It's not okay. It's just got to get fixed. And it's so much worse than all these other streets I'm familiar with. I listened to Patricia, and she probably had very good comments. Some of them aren't that bad. I can't imagine anything being worse than this. So I don't know who's looked at it. I'm willing to work. I try to offer solutions, did my homework with the tree people, what the best way to do it is. And I just need kind of some answers. 2 years is too long. It's embarrassing, and now it's unsightly and it's dangerous. So it's not really, I don't really see it as an option. And it's not just because I live here. It's that bad. So I've been here over 20 years, and it just needs to get fixed. So what do I do now? I need to make sure that this is on the list. Like I said, anybody would drive by 6 Stockwell, get out of your car, take a look, and you'd be like, oh my God, how do we let this get this bad? But it's the solution that is my concern, to where, Karen actually asked me to survey the people on my street. We've got a lot of turnover here with a lot of little kids. I said, she said, maybe we could just remove the sidewalks. And I said, well, it's fine. My kids are in college. And overwhelmingly, people do not want them removed. They want their kids to be able to walk safely to the bus stop. And that's what everybody came up with. So please tell me what I need to do. Been on this for an hour and a half. I went to the town and presented a month ago, back and forth emails with everybody in town. I just don't know what else to do. I'm in the private sector. I actually run 70 retail locations. This would be fixed in the morning. Because
so
the liability is anything. So that's sorry, who's speaking? I'm sorry.
Jason, I was just, can you wrap it up? Answer your question.
Oh, okay. Well, the last person spoke for a half hour. So I'm wrapping it up. I just need to know what the next step is. If there's anything I need to do, I'm willing to help. I can meet people out here. It's a priority. Just let me know. So is there anyone, any comment? Most of you guys are aware of this already, because it's hit you all at different times. I will now listen.
Yeah, so I think it's certainly on the list. I don't know that any guarantee of what Mr. Tobin Hicks asked you to mute. There's an echo.
Should I put my hand down? Because now everything's perfect, and now I can't hear you. I will lower my hand. Will that help?
I don't believe so. I'm just going to remove your permission to talk for a second.
That's fine. Thank you.
If you need to say something else, just I'm going to lower your hand, remove your permission to talk. If you need to come, if you have something else, certainly just raise your hand again. So to answer your questions, it's certainly on the list. I don't know that any of us can make a guarantee of whether it's part of our recommendation. The select board will also weigh in on this as well. What I can tell you though is the town is certainly aware of it. Mr. Purple also, I believe, has been keeping you informed of when these things will be discussed. As someone that works in the private sector as well, I can share your frustration at how slow sometimes municipal government works. I think all of us have our own individual frustrations at times, but unfortunately, we are a 10,000 plus resident town. And while there's certainly work that needs to be done on Stockwell, there are probably many other people in town that believe their streets are just as worse, if not worse. And it becomes a point of irreconcilable differences at certain points in time. So I would just ask you to continue certainly to advocate, keep us informed of what you're seeing on the street. And our job is to keep you informed of when these discussions will occur to allow you to continue to advocate. I will ask you to consider one thing, and then I'm going to ask Ms. Galligan if she has any things she wants us to be aware of on this topic before I bring Jeff back in. I'm not as close to this topic as Ms. Braccio, but trees are certainly a very hot button topic in this town. There are certainly going to be town meeting articles related to trees. I don't know if Stockwell is even a scenic road or not, Lisa, but there's just naturally a lot of focus on that. And given that we are talking about trees, I get it's trees impacting a sidewalk. I think there's just other parties that are going to have to weigh in, namely thinking through the process, Lisa, that you and planning go through. I will never sit here and try to understand anything more about trees and how that all works. But I do just want Mr. Tobin to be aware of that fact as well, that I think, well, we're aware of the sidewalk issue. I have personally been to the neighborhood multiple times and seen it and can agree with your assessment. I think, there's multiple facets that have to go into, unfortunately, how the government works. I'm not saying whether I agree or disagree with it. I'm just saying there's a process to everything in this community as well as other communities. So your voice is definitely heard. I guess, Karen Galligan, is there anything you want to say specific to that topic?
No, thank you.
Okay. So I imagine you will address in your memo, which we will make sure Mr. Tobin gets a copy of, whether you think that that's something that you would prioritize or not compared to what else you have seen in town.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Unless this committee has anything else they want to discuss specific to roads, I'm going to move on to our other topics, knowing that we want to try to end around 9:30. If there are other members of the public that want to weigh in on this topic, you can certainly send our committee an email. You can send me an email and I will make sure the committee gets a copy, or you can speak at public comment at the end of this, just in the interest of moving forward to some of the other topics we have on our list. All right, so I'm going to bring Jeff back in, and I'm going to move to our next agenda topic, which is request for addition to capital plan, fire, police, shelter relocation for radios. So Mark, I have not provided all the correspondence that I became aware of on this from the advisory chair. But what I was looking for capital to weigh in on is whether this is something we should even be weighing in on, and whether this lines up to the capital policy. I think my personal opinion is it's a gray area, but I thought what I'd have you do is just walk through the facts and let the committee decide whether this is something we want to entertain a formal discussion and vote on tonight or at our Monday meeting.
Sure. Again, Chief Achilles does this topic the most justice, but I'll give you a broad brush. The town has some of our equipment for our radio communications up at EMC, which is now Dell. There is a tower on the property, and there are several other vendors which have equipment up on the tower, and the town has repeaters up on the tower for our radio system. It's probably one of the most important parts of our communication system for police and fire. And last fall, the shed that that some of the equipment is in, that connects to the repeaters up on the tower, we found that the building was taking in water and was potentially could damage the equipment. So whenever it would rain, it caused an issue with our equipment. So we had talked with the people at Dell and the management company to see what our options would be. We talked about the possibility of moving to a shed on the other side of the tower, which did not have the same water issues. There were a couple of vendors involved with this. One is the equipment that is in the shed. The second is the vendor to put in the fiber connections, connecting into the shed from our fiber connection, and also then connecting the equipment up on the tower, from the new location with the fiber. The fiber is fed underground and fed up into the existing building, the shed. So therefore, it's got to go back underground and be routed back over to the new location. It was difficult for us to get pricing, get information, management company. This was something we would have liked to have taken care of in the spring, or at least before the fiscal year changed, because we did have some availability of funds to do this. But certain pricing did not come back until after the new fiscal year began in July. The total cost for this project was about $20,000 with the two vendors. However, there has been a price increase from one of the vendors. So now the work, I believe, is somewhere between $23,000 and $24,000. We're taking a look at this right now. This is something that has to be done. It's critical work. We would, likely take a look at doing this, out of the IT budget at this point, if we needed to, possibly using some additional funding sources with fire, such as Harvard funds, and cobbling together the work to take place now, because again, it's critical work for our system. And then seeing where we end up at the end of the fiscal year, the possibility that we may be able to do an interdepartmental transfer and not have to look at a reserve fund transfer and not have to look at a capital expense. So it may be a little bit of a long-winded answer, Mr. Chair, as to whether or not this is an issue properly before you tonight, or simply just a notification of where we happen to be.
Any questions on that topic? So we have 3 paths forward. Oh, go ahead, Joe.
Given that we've passed up on this apparently in the spring, what's the priority to get this done?
I think the priority is pretty significant. We have to make certain accommodations inside the building when it rains and hope that works well. Now, we've had a very dry or fairly dry summer. There's been some problematic weather that comes through, which we've had to accommodate for, but I don't think it's been a terrible year for this particular issue. But again, it's critical for our radio infrastructure for public safety. So public safety can't properly respond, if these pieces happen to go down, and we really can't afford that liability. So this is something that, the sooner we can get it done and get the vendors in and lined up, the better.
So this is really about operating on a daily basis, not on an emergency basis, correct? Okay, I understand.
Any other questions on the concept? Jeff?
Ambulance fund, is that an option? Pay for it?
I'm sorry, say again?
Ambulance fund, is that an option?
We have really used ambulance fund quite a bit. And I would let, Jason could actually speak to that as well, but I think we've tried to do a lot more capital. We've tried to do, a lot more with it. An additional $25,000 inside of a year may not sound like a lot, but it's something we'd probably have to go and run some numbers on and make sure it's not going to put us in a bad position either this year or in a future year when we were depending on it for a capital purpose.
It sounds like what you're saying is we're maybe a couple bad storms away from sustaining some significant damage to some pretty expensive equipment, right?
It could be. Again, we're dealing with communications and electronics and things that shouldn't get wet. And in a building that is somewhat porous. So we like I said, in a perfect world, if we could have gotten everything lined up when we needed to and gotten the management company to be responsive when we needed them and the vendors, and I'm not going to point to supply chain issues because that seems like an easy out, but we're still waiting on some IT equipment that we ordered almost a year ago. So, there are some issues like that, which I think has put us a little bit further behind this than we need to. So it's as soon as we can get people lined up, it's got to happen.
And my personal opinion is that, we're letting the process kind of dictate the need for something pretty utter importance, right? Where you can never be too prepared. And we've seen that recently in the past couple of weeks. So I don't know. I feel like we should just figure out a way to get this done.
So we can't control the reserve fund. That's solely up to advisory.
So maybe that's our answer then.
But I think the question before us is an item over 10,000. It doesn't fit necessarily squarely into any one of the items in the capital plan. But I think if we were doing this in the spring at the last town meeting, this would have been under a capital warrant article. It wouldn't have been in a budget line item. All right. Mark talked about maybe if had any additional funds to have covered it, but the question is, do we want to consider this as a formal capital request or not? And if we do, we should just take a formal vote. I'll get all the documentation to all of you and we'll take a formal vote at the next meeting. So I just need to know whether you think that this is something we should add to the capital plan. We're not going to delay anything. It's 3 days, 4 days away at this point. I think there's some much more deeper conversations that need to happen at the advisory in select board level. So we would just be more doing what our part of the process is.
And regardless of the the timing of when the issue came to light, the timing that it took to get all the information that we needed to have to try to line up what the actual expenses were going to be. And because this is cutting across fiscal years, I get the sense that advisory may not view this, as a reserve fund transfer. And, because it doesn't quite fit into the box of unforeseen and unexpected. So, that may be why, advisory, is probably not going to be an option, or at least not one that would be well received if this was brought to advisory for a transfer.
And I think Joe, and Joe, I'm coming to you a second. I think Jeff's idea on ambulance, Mark, I think there is candidly some room there, but that requires town meeting authorization. So I think that's going to come down to you and the chief and obviously the select board that would have to sponsor that article of whether that could even happen. I get we're trying not to do budgetary items that would hit the tax rate, but obviously that is something that would require town meeting approval. So I think we should just validate with Brian where he thinks we're at on that. Just have an answer one way or another to Jeff's question. So Joe, do you have a comment specifically related to whether we should consider this from a capital plan perspective?
Only two things. One is I would like to know, addressing Jeff's question of the potential property loss value, if there's a problem. And two, I would like to have advisory weigh in on whether they would allocate funds to this before we put it on the plan.
Specifically from the reserve fund.
Yes, or another outlet that they have.
So we're kind of the first part of the cog. We have to say whether it's a valid capital expense, and whereas we can make recommendations on the funding. There's obviously
Mark, is the loss greater than $25,000 if there's a problem?
I mean, it's kind of conjecture. I can't, I can't tell you, I honestly don't know the value of all of the equipment in there. But the repeaters up on the tower, would not be impacted because those obviously are made to live outside in the weather. But I'm not aware of, fully of all the equipment that is inside of the shed.
I think we can safely answer Joe's question is yes. What I will say is it's an operational item. So I'm getting the sense that we want to weigh in as capital. Does anyone not want to weigh in as capital? Okay. So then for our road, we're gonna have a 2 agenda item meeting. I will get you the memo from Chief Achilles that originally went to advisory. We will weigh in on the capital merits of it. We can make funding recommendations, and then we will watch it move through the rest of the process and let advisory weigh in on whether they think it's reserve fund. We can answer Jeff's question on ambulance fund. And obviously, Mark and the chief can think about if both of those don't come to fruition, which path they would go down. Good on that?
Jason, given your suggestion tonight, I think a good path forward would be for capital to, to take a look at recommending this project, and at the same time, on a parallel track, we'll take a look at ambulance fund and seeing if something like that could be sustained in this year, and would then ask the select board, to put an article on to fund this improvement with obviously the recommendation of capital. And it would kind of fit into the box of we're not taking a funding source that is going to impact the tax rate.
Lisa, do you have something else on this topic?
Yeah, just quickly, Jason. So would it be useful to invite Chief Achilles as well to answer any specific questions regarding the equipment? Again, I haven't
Yes.
seen the memo.
Yeah.
Okay,
That's
so
why
good.
that's
Sorry.
why I'm not taking a vote on this tonight. I was asked by the advisory chair whether it was a capital item. I candidly thought it was a gray area, so I thought this committee need to weigh in first on that piece before we dove into a deeper rabbit hole. So I will get everyone the documentation. I'll invite the chief if he's available to our next meeting. All right, we're going to go on to our next item, which is a second capital request related to trails. I'm bringing Kat over. This is a continuation of the last discussion we had where we added the Peninsula Trail on, but we kind of pushed back on the crosswalks to get more information. Kat has now submitted 2 capital request forms, one specific to the crosswalk by Stony Brook, and she can re-articulate the parking lot that's in play there and the urgency around that. And then, Kat, I think that's the primary focus for tonight, correct?
Yes, and if
And
you
then-
guys need to save time, you can skip the second one and we can talk about it in the future.
So we will do that one based on the timing that you put in the reform. We will do that as part of our normal capital process this year. Obviously, if you become aware of some magic funding source that we're not aware of, that you can fund it sooner, let us know and we'll accelerate it. But otherwise, we'll put that into kind of the parking lot for this year. So in front of us, we have the form that Kat submitted, and there's a quote. Kat, I don't know if there's anything you want to articulate on. I do think we need to understand there's 2 quotes in here. One is the 15,000, and then there's also something else that says preferred option. That's a much higher number. Which one are you asking us to consider?
Did I put the preferred option on the wrong quote? So I was trying to identify the quote the lower quote of the 2.
Okay.
Did I put it on the wrong one? I might have.
I think it was just multiple pages. That's all. So totally. So basically, you're asking us to consider a request for $15,000 specifically related to the Stony Brook crosswalk. Is that correct?
Yes.
And
Correct.
the funding source would be ARPA funds.
Yes.
Okay.
And with a caveat that it may actually, if Karen, I spoke with Karen from DPW about your suggestion on, can we get economies of scale by coupling it with another project? And that is something that might happen, or if there's other options in town, public work projects that could work, and it may come in less.
Okay. So an up to $15,000.
Yep.
No, that's what I'm hearing. So are there any questions on the submission? Go ahead, Joe.
Does this relate also to use of the parking lot across the street in that area?
I'm sorry, Joe, I'm having a little bit of a hard time hearing you. Can you just say that one more time?
Does this relate to use of the parking lot?
Yes.
On the private property across the street over there?
Correct. Sanofi has agreed to allow us to use 8 to 10 parking spots if we put in a crosswalk.
Okay, so that would then give us public use of private property,
Correct.
at least under the, is there any time range for that agreement, or is it just a handshake?
So I think you said, is there any timeline to that agreement?
Yes.
Okay, yes, no, but it came up during, I think it was Mr. Purple's recommendation, or it came up, maybe it was Sam Stivers during the last select board meeting, that we would run this by legal counsel and find out if we could put together an agreement of use, so that any, if we're gonna spend money, can we get some sort of guarantee that we can use the parking spaces for a number of years that would make it worth our while.
Yes. Yeah. If we can get that agreement, I'm perfectly comfortable.
Any other questions or comments? Joe, do you want that in the motion?
I would love that in the motion.
Okay, so I'll move that the Capital Planning Committee approve the recommendation of the Stony Brook Crosswalk addition to the capital plan for an amount up to $15,000, with the understanding that the funding source will be ARPA funds, and that the Trails Committee will continue to work with Mr. Purple and Town Council on securing any and all appropriate agreements for use of that private property. There a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All right, we'll do a roll call vote. Ms. Brascio?
Aye.
Hark?
Aye.
Palmer?
Aye.
Shoner?
Aye.
Wheeler?
Aye.
And Malinowski is aye.
Great, thank
Thanks for
you.
waiting around 2 hours for that.
Hey, I was doing other stuff, so I appreciate it. I appreciate your
Appreciate
time
it.
and your support.
Anytime.
Okay.
All right, let us know if you need anything else. Thank you for coming.
Mhm.
All right, we are at public comment. Ms. Burns Fury, do you have another comment? I see your hand went down, so I'm gonna assume no. Put your hand back up if you want to speak again. I'm seeing no other public comment, so I think we agreed Monday night. Do we want to do 7:30 again? Via Zoom, 2 agenda topic meeting. We'll have a memo from Karen and documentation from Chief Achilles, and hopefully both in attendance as well. And then we will set a meeting schedule via email for the fall. Any other business for this evening?
Jason, I have one question,
Sure.
if I may. And Mark, I don't know if you've answered this, but it came up last night when we were going over the warrant, the article on the software for the assessors, Mark. And I said
Right.
it should come through capital, and Kathy wasn't sure that software should come through capital. And I said I would come back and just verify with the committee. It was a $12,500 purchase.
Mr.
Yes.
Sabelli has submitted something for consideration and will be on a future agenda. And
Okay,
I
perfect.
have it properly timed to make sure that we can weigh in. So he did it out of an abundance of caution, just to make sure he was within the 4 corners of the policy.
Perfect. Thank you. I just wanted to make sure because it was brought up last night. Thank you.
Thanks. All right. Seeing no other business, I'll make a motion to adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
All right. Roll call vote. Brascio?
Aye.
Hark?
Aye.
Shoner?
Aye.
Palmer?
Aye.
Wheeler?
Aye.
And Malinowski's aye. Have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you.
Joe, have fun on